I'm Sasha DeWitt, and this is the Studio Notes Podcast, the show where I chat with artists about the real-life stuff of being an artist. Hi, and welcome to Studio Notes with me, Sasha DeWitt, and today's guest, Gillian Lee Smith. Gillian is a Scottish painter who lives in Northumberland. And so whenever I think of your work, the word atmospheric comes to mind. And over the years, I've seen that you've painted people and landscapes. And when I first started following you on Instagram, you were painting forests and trees. So what I find fascinating about your work is that when I first started studying visual arts, people talked about sort of storytelling and narratives within paintings. And I had come from this English lit background, so I only understood storytelling in the context of words on a page with a beginning, middle, and end. But when I look at your paintings, for me, they really do hold story and narrative in them. And it was kind of the first time I understood this is what people are talking about when they speak about sort of paintings and narrative. So of course, with the portraits, you've got the story of the person, but also thinking about your landscapes and the forests. There's this sort of real in-between and folkloric feelings that arise for me. And that has really helped me sort of understand this idea of story and narrative. But what I'd love for you to talk about is sort of why you paint the way you paint, and what do you think of yourself as being translated onto the canvas?
That was the best introduction ever. Thank you so much. I just love that you see that in my work, and it is a response that I get often. Atmospheric is absolutely the word that comes up a lot when people are responding to my work. So just everything you said, I just love that. I need to capture that as a little summary to put on my website or something. But anyway, hello, I'm Gillian, as Sasha so beautifully introduced me. So yeah, I live in Northumberland. I am originally from Scotland, but my degree was in costume design. I went to Edinburgh Art College and studied performance costume, which was designing and making costumes. I went to art college to do painting, but for various reasons, I don't know if we'll get into that, but for various reasons, I ended up doing performance costume. And it's interesting because, like many artists, I did a zigzag route to get to where I am now. But I honestly don't think my artwork would be what it is if I hadn't have studied performance costume. So even though I'm working two-dimensionally and painting, I think everything in that, obviously it comes from me and my lifelong experience and who I am, but a big part of it also came from the fact that I studied costume design, because costume design is entirely based on story and narrative. And certainly in the way that I studied it, we were given a brief, and it would be maybe a play or a book, and we would have to design costumes around it. And within that, we had absolute freedom to interpret it in any way that we wanted. So you could do, I guess, a direct, if it was a historical text, you could do a historical creation of the costumes, or you could kind of go completely off piste and do something that was entirely new and entirely different. And I guess that's kind of the way that I would go. I'd sort of meld lots of things together. I'm trying to think of an example. For my final degree costumes, I did Beowulf, which is obviously a very famous Anglo-Saxon poem. And I brought in, I looked at Belgian fashion design from the 90s. I looked at Victorian costumes. I looked at archaeology. I looked at fossils. I looked at different interpretations of dragons in different cultures. So I really kind of broadened out my research in order to create costumes that I felt told a story of Beowulf, but perhaps in a new way. So I wanted these costumes to look as if they had been dug out of the earth, basically. I wanted them to have very strong silhouettes and for them to look like they've been dug out of the earth on an archaeological dig. So that's how I kind of created the costumes with that in mind. And that has translated into my painting now. So I love research, probably too much. one of the things that my tutors always said at art college was, okay, Gillian, you've spent 90% of the project time researching. Maybe it's time for you to actually get down to designing and making the costumes, because I just loved going down that kind of rabbit hole of research and creating rich layers in the the understanding of how I could interpret the story and create costumes out of that. And the same thing happens in my paintings. It sounds a bit cliche. I'm creating a richly layered surface in the paintings, but there's also a lot within that goes into my approach, the research that I take, my perspective, and yes, the landscape. But within all of that, I think that there's a huge part of it that just comes from my own character, my own life experience. Even in the woodland paintings, yes, they're about woodland. Yes, I went and sketched the woodland, but so much of what is in there is a kind of richly layered surface of me, my life, my emotions, just everything that we kind of go through to get to where we are. So I don't know if that kind of that's probably like the briefest summary of the way that I can answer your question, but maybe if there's anything that comes out of that for you, we can kind of I don't know, talk about that. But,
well, I think from thinking about, doing your final project in that Beowulf, which I can really see a connection with what you do nowadays as well. And like, as you said, research is quite important to how you paint as well.
Yes.
Thinking about after the Beowulf, what did you do then in terms of, did you go directly into painting, or were there a few other steps?
Oh yes, there were a few other steps. I worked on a couple of small films after graduating. I was older when I went to art college, so I was 30, I think, when I started art college. Yeah, so I'm trying to track back. I'm not very good with numbers.
I want to ask about as well, because I was older. I was 35, and I think it is a real, a lot of people feel like, well, I'm too old to go back.
Oh
but
my
actually,
gosh, no.
You're never too old.
Never too old. So I graduated 17 years ago. So yeah, I was maybe 29 but I had a long route to even get to art college. And so within that, I guess I kind of some of the people that I studied with were able to go into jobs where they weren't being paid or like do the apprenticeship thing. And I just was not in that situation. I needed to earn money.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because it annoys me, to be honest, when you're working with younger people. Their parents are still often footing the bill. And it can be really difficult because, you have to be very practical from the start. You don't have time to be an intern.
Yeah, exactly. And I did know people who would maybe do like an awful job, like work in a call center for 6 months, save up money so that they then could take on an apprenticeship. But I just I wasn't in a position to be able to do that. So I really had to kind of get to work. And I did work on a couple of films, but I have I have a back problem. And the thing about costume design and working in films, and I was working in the Highlands of Scotland, I was standing for 18 hours a day, carrying costumes. I was on my hands and knees, putting shoes on actors and washing costumes overnight while everyone else was sleeping. and it's really, in film, probably in theatre as well, but in film, it's a really physically demanding job. And whilst my back kind of held out while I was doing the film, as soon as I stopped, it just went, and I just couldn't work for a while. So I kind of quickly realized that this was not going to be the best option for me. And so I had a long period actually where I couldn't work because of my back, and I started painting. I just started painting. I'd been painting before I went to art college, and The thing that I loved about costume design was there was definitely the illustration aspect to it. There was a mixed media aspect. So I, even though I didn't do a painting degree, I was still kind of working in multimedia, let's say. So I was able to kind of really quickly kind of drop into doing that very naturally when I wasn't able to work. And then I had a couple of part-time jobs, and I ended up doing getting a part-time job where I was doing reminiscence work with older people in care homes and things. It kind of happened, sometimes things just, you don't even know how they happen. I can't even really remember the steps that kind of led up to that, but that's what I ended up doing, and I loved it. So for a number of years, that's what I was doing. I was working with community groups and going into care homes, and it was really fun because we made up reminiscence boxes that had different. So again, this is interesting, this storytelling theme, right? Because we'd make up themed boxes. So there would be one on childhood, there would be one on domestic life, there would be one, there would just be all these themed boxes on different parts of people's lives. And I was working with people who had dementia and Alzheimer. And you would take these boxes into the care homes, and more often than not, the people would say, well, I don't have anything interesting. I haven't lived an interesting life. I don't have anything to share or anything to say. And I would use music as well, and nursery rhymes and poems and things. And you put a piece of music on, and immediately people start singing. If it's something, even when they have quite far into dementia and Alzheimer's, they recognize it and they start singing. And all of a sudden, people start giving these insights into their lives, the lives that they felt were not interesting enough that they had anything to say about them. And then the next person was like, oh my gosh, well, I had that, or I did that, and you'd bring out an object that they probably hadn't seen for 40 years. It'd be like an old mince grinder that you put on the side of the counter of the kitchen. And something as simple as an object would just get people, they'd start talking about that, but then they talk about, oh, so when I would go to the grocers, they used to put the butter in paper, and it's so funny because even that job that in one sense seems so distant from my costume degree and so distant from what I'm doing now is absolutely relevant and has also played its part in the work that I'm doing now. So that's kind of I basically was doing that for a few years, and whilst I was doing that, I started to create online courses, and I was doing exhibitions and working with galleries. So it got to a point a few years ago where I was able to, I loved that work, but it was time to kind of stop and sort of go full-time as an artist with the support of the other work that I do that kind of brings in the income. But it definitely played a big part in what I'm doing because of the storytelling. So yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, I love that journey. I can see how that would absolutely feed into what you're doing now and that sort of storytelling and just seeing life. I love that, working with people who think they haven't done anything in life, and just living is enough, really, because
Yes.
just by living you are doing stuff. And yeah, so that's very interesting to bring the stories out in them. So then from that, you said you started doing courses and you started painting and became a full-time artist. So what does full-time artist look like at that point?
At that point, yeah, it was literally so this was maybe, gosh, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. So I didn't know that e-courses was a thing. I didn't know that online courses was a thing. I did a couple of online courses, but I don't think it was really a thing in the UK. I think I got in there quite quick and starting to create online courses in the UK. I could be wrong in that, but this was sort of 10, 11 years ago. And I had done a couple of online courses in America, and that was actually sorry, the artist was in America. And that was really the trigger to get me back into painting, because I knew I wanted to paint, but I didn't know how to restart that process, or how do I begin? As many of us, when we've had that gap. so I did a couple of online courses, and then people started saying to me, why don't you do an online course? So again, it was really something that I hadn't even thought of doing, but people really encouraged me. So I launched my first online course, and then off the back of that, another one and another one. So that's really it was that enabled me to then become a full-time artist. So I have that, it's kind of a three-strand thing. I have my online courses, I mentor other artists, and then I obviously have my own art practice, and I have a studio, and I exhibit through galleries and exhibitions and things. So that's what that's what my full-time art practice looks like now, I guess, with those things. Yeah.
And when you started back painting, did you start by painting the portraits, or were you doing landscapes, or what were you doing at that
Oh,
point?
yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. The landscapes did not happen until I moved to Northumberland 7 years ago. So before that, I was still very much focused on people. My work, I guess you would say, I have the woodland work that maybe I can talk about that a little bit, but that came out of the pandemic, basically. But my work before that, and even before the landscapes, was kind of maritime based in maritime history. I read a book called In the Heart of the Sea, which was about the whaling industry in Nantucket Island, and it just kind of uh, obviously completely against whaling or any harm to any animals, but there was something about the stories within that just kind of lit a fire inside of me, really, and I just got very interested in the whaling and fishing communities, and uh, it kind of started there. And then I'm from the east coast of Scotland, so very, a little bit inland, but my mother is from a fishing town. And I got very interested in the east coast of Scotland fishing industries, and of course now the north of England, because that's where I live. Um, but I just had this. I was just very inspired by the idea of the men going off to sea in the communities, and it was the women who were left behind. And obviously, there's a great sadness to that. But actually, the women, in Nantucket Island, it was really the women who kind of ran the roost. They were the heart of the community. They led the community. While there was obviously the older generations of men, but the women had to be incredibly strong whilst the men were away at sea, and they were away at sea for 2 or 3 years. And the thing that I find funny about that is, I bet when the men came back, like after a week, they were just like, "Oh my gosh, will you just go away again?" You're sort of used to like almost kind of living your own life for all those years, and then your husband comes back, and I can just imagine that would be a really interesting dynamic. So I just got very interested in this, and then obviously the sadness of not knowing if your husband was going to come home, because it was it is a very dangerous industry, and it's the same here. The fishing industry is I guess one of the most dangerous jobs that you can have. So there's an uncertainty in that, there's hope in that, there's really strong connections of the community, there's folklore within that. Just again, it's like all these layers of things that I just find incredibly interesting. So I created this body of work called We All Cast Shadows, it wasn't set in any particular place, but it was about my feelings about fishing communities, the women and children left behind, and kind of illustrating that in some way. And I incorporated landscapes of harbors and things into that work. And interestingly, after creating that body of work, I also created a book of it, and I gifted my mum the book. And she told me that my great grandfather and my great grandmother were herring. That there was a herring fishing industry that went round the coast of Scotland and England following the herring. And my great grandfather and great grandmother had been part of that. And my mum says she told me when I was a kid, but I definitely didn't have any conscious awareness of that. You know, if she told me, I'd completely forgotten about it. So I think serendipity comes quite a lot in I guess my journey of being an artist. So in a way that was great, because then it gave me a kind of place, right? So I'd been creating this body of work that was about my idea of a fishing community in a general area, but then it gave me this idea of a specific place. And so I was incorporating landscapes within that, but it was women and children in harbour situations, or almost like they were waiting for the men to come home. So that was what that body of work was around. And then I moved to Northumberland 7, almost 8 years ago, and the landscape here is just incredible. Like we have so many castles. It's a really varied landscape. It's incredibly rugged in places. There's valleys and, as I say, castles and woodland, and obviously it's on the coast, so we do have lots of fishing villages here, very tiny fishing villages. But I kind of overnight stopped painting people because I got so kind of enamored with the landscape here, but also the harbour. So I got very interested in this idea of the edge between land and sea, and the fact that we've built these structures, fishing villages, harbour walls, that that kind of sit on that edge, and they're man-made, and yet the harbors around here, you can imagine that they've just always been there. They're a few hundred years old, but they just look timeless. They just look like they just belong in the landscape. So often when we build things as humans, it can look just like it doesn't belong, right? It just doesn't sit into the landscape very well. But there's something about harbors that I just feel they just belong there, and they just look right, and they feel right, and they're special places for me to go. So I started painting a lot of harbors, and I got very interested in the harbor walls and the marks of the weather on the harbor walls. It's so funny, because one of the things that I realized within that was I never painted the boats in the harbor. Uh, which is such a peculiar thing, because that's what they're for, right? They're there to harbor the boats before they go out to sea and when they return. And it wasn't a conscious thing, but I just was very interested in the texture of the walls, the very geometric shapes of the harbor walls, like sat against the landscape and the seascape, the ropes and the ladders, and they're just so beautiful to me. But I wasn't painting the boats, and I don't really know why. I've never kind of analysed. It's probably
just because you don't want to paint boats. You're like, oh, they're too structurally like challenging.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting that you say that, because I don't think it was that, because then I started painting boats and ships out at sea. So it kind of went from the harbours to me then painting these really stormy, kind of shipwreck, ships at sea. So I just wasn't painting them in the harbour, but I was painting them at sea. I'm sure there's some deep psychological meaning behind that, but
but even if I just think about your first works, which were sort of the women and children at home and the men are at sea, so it kind of makes sense that the boats are not in the harbour, that they are out at sea. So I see some links between those two.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's probably more simple than I think. I'm kind of thinking, is there some deep emotional reason why? And yes, exactly. But there's always this sense of peril. The recent paintings that I was doing based on that, there would be like a ship in peril at sea, and then it'd be a little boat that would be going out to save it. And I would sort of name the paintings An Answer from the Shore, or one that I painted this year was called All Is Not Lost. So it's this idea that there is this ship in peril, this, probably a big ship, and there's people on there, and it's really awful. But there's this little tiny boat that is going out to do the best they can to rescue these people. And so I think there's definitely something in that as well. So it's almost, again, it's that layers thing. It's it's all the same subject, but I'm constantly trying to find different ways into that subject, or different perspectives, or tell the story in different ways. I guess that's how I could explain it, but it's never a conscious thing. It's really it just feels like a gradual intuitive evolution of my work that I never kind of make, it I wouldn't even say that I would really know where one thing ended and the next started. It's such a kind, it just evolves gradually, and it's always evolving. And I think, because some people might look at my work and kind of say, oh, 1 minute you're painting people, the next minute you're painting buildings, the next minute you're painting woodland, the next minute you're painting ships and harbors. But to me, there is a very distinct thread that connects everything together. And I loved what your the last podcast, the podcast that I listened to with she kind of said curious. She kept saying this word curiosity, and I think that's just what it is about for me. Is it's a journey. That's a very cliched word, but it's a journey, and I'm just curious, and I'm just trying to. I know what I want to do. I know what I'm interested in. I know what I'm curious about. And I'm just trying to, I just really enjoy and I get very excited by finding different ways of approaching a subject that is really quite big, but in the same time, quite small. And I just love kind of exploring it in different ways. So
I really love that, because I think, and maybe why I wanted to come in on this angle today with you is because, subject matter is something that I struggle with, because I think as well, because I came from this illustration background where really a good illustrator is going to have a wide variety of subject matter that they can deal with, because you don't know what a client might ask you to draw, or, so coming into painting, I have really struggled with, trying to not, I keep thinking, oh, I'm jumping around, or, there's that like you say, you've done people, you've done seascapes, you've done landscapes, you've done the forest, but actually, and I've never thought of you as jumping around, because I can see a thread that goes all the way through all of your work. To me, when I look at it, it looks very cohesive. Whereas definitely when I look at my stuff, it's like vultures one day, flowers the next. So I guess I'm very interested in that sort of like the subject matter and how you've. And it's not even deciding, it's sort of these things, I think through time, you just become, this is what I'm interested in, and this is what I'm exploring. And to see how you're exploring that sort of area that you're in, so Northumberland, but as well, looking at the stories that are in that area that are to do with the sea and fishing, because that's very much the community that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, because interestingly, I created a program called Building a Body of Work, because I had been teaching the online courses that were very maybe technique or subject based, and I'm going to show you how to paint a face using these materials, which I really enjoyed, and I really love working with the people who study on these courses that way. But I guess the thing that I saw a gap with was, okay, so what do people do next? How do they then start sinking into their own work and finding what they're interested in, and how they're going to create that, how they're going to represent that, how that work is going to feel even in the creation of it and for the people who look at it. This is something that I'm just incredibly interested in, and I think that's I just realized that I kind of inherently knew all of this because I could really feel that was present in my own work. And I guess I wanted to kind of share that and say, you can do this too. You can find this deep, you can, find this deep immersion into something that you're incredibly interested in and create artwork out of it in your own way. So that's why I created that program. But obviously, in whatever we do, we're the kind of common denominator, right? We're the thing that pulls everything that we are that we're creating together. And I know that in my own work there's a darkness to it, in the color palette, but also I think there's maybe a melancholic feeling to it often. And it's so funny because I met someone a few years ago who'd known my work for a while before we met, and she said that before she met me, she thought I was going to be really miserable. that isn't the word she used. I won't say the words that she used, but she thought it was
a dark goth. figure.
Exactly. I think I'm very serious. I think I'm very thoughtful. I think there is a melancholic side to me, but there's a very curious side to me. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but there's a very richly layered surface, as there is in all of us. But I think I want to bring that into my artwork, right? I want there to be for you to be able to, one of my favorite things that people say about my paintings, that, or not everybody, but the people who like them say, is that I could look at your work every day and see something different in it every time I looked at it. And that's one of my favorite comments ever, because that's what I'm trying to bring into my work, that is so richly layered that it's not a surface thing that you're going to capture everything in 30 seconds, that you're going to come to it and maybe see different things. I get people that say they see faces in my woodland paintings or figures in my woodland paintings, and I love that too. So yeah, sorry, I've forgotten what your question was, but it's just like I think it's that's just what I'm always kind of trying to bring to my work. So yeah.
It's really interesting as well to hear about, because I think we were discussing, your work in a wider context, the themes that go through all of it, and then thinking about so when you create these things, and we might get in a little bit to talking about the commercial, because you support yourself as well, and I know it's something that I like about you as an artist, is that you do talk about quite openly, like, I'm doing this to support myself. So discussing a little bit about commercial viability and painting what you want, because that's where I think a lot of where, when you started, you're painting what you want, but then also realizing, well, how, is this stuff sellable? Do I even need to be thinking about that? So what are some of your thoughts around that area?
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts on that. So I very, very quickly knew that I did not want to be, when people think of a full-time artist, they think that an artist is painting all the time, right? Or whatever their practice is, sculpting, drawing, whatever. The vision of a full-time artist is someone who dedicates their entire week and every day to creating their work. And I don't think I know one single person who does that. I don't, but if you're not an artist, that's the illusion that we have, right? And I very, very quickly knew that even if that was a possibility, that is not what I wanted to do, because my work, first and foremost, and overridingly, is that word, has to come from me and satisfy me and be an honest representation of who I am, what I believe, my emotions, my feelings, my life story. And that is, I was going to say, that is not a sellable thing. I don't know that that's a sellable thing, right? And I don't know that you can depend on selling your, I'm sure there obviously will be people who can do this, like all the artists that we admire, the Tracy Emmons, like whatever, they have taken that journey that enables them to do that. But I never wanted to be in a position where I was dependent on my art solely for my income, because I knew that the type of person that I am, I would eventually, I say eventually, but very quickly become crippled by that. That I would start to think, okay, are people going to like this painting? Am I going to be able to sell it? If I don't sell it, what am I going to do? That, and then I just knew, and I guess I knew because of the person I am, but also because I'd seen other artists, this happening to other artists, that you start to change the way that you work. Because you start to worry if it's going to sell or not. And I remember a gallery that I worked with telling me that one of their like long-term stable artists had started to become incredibly anxious about his work, and he'd sold a lot of work, but he just got to the point where he was so stressed about it and was starting to, is this sky the right blue? Are people going to like it? Is this going to fit in their homes?
Well, exactly. I found
Oh.
myself yesterday painting and thinking, is this going to match somebody's living room? And then I was like, why am I thinking about somebody's living room when there's a myriad of people, a load of different living rooms, and I cannot worry about that?
Yes, it is so true. And I think if you start to, this is just my philosophy, and I think, that everybody will think differently and uniquely about this, but if you start to try and please everybody or make work that will please everybody or a great number of people, then you lose, or you can lose, the uniqueness of your work. First of all, you can lose the uniqueness of your work. You can lose the passion for your work. You can forget what you're creating and why you're creating it very easily. And you can just lose yourself within that. And I have really, I guess I just have this very strong belief that I can only create artwork that, as I said, like primarily comes from me and is for me. And in that, I'm thinking, I always have this thing in my head, I couldn't give two hoots what anyone else thinks of it. I have to think, like, I don't care if anybody else likes it. Because that's just the only way that I can create. Now, the wonderful side effect of that, I think, is that, so I do art fairs. So there's an art fair that I've been at a couple of years, and there will be many people at that art fair that will just not even look at my work and walk by it, and they don't give it a second glance. There will be people who I can hear their comments as they're walking by it. And I kind of get a little bit of a kick about that. But then I will get the person who will stand in front of my work. And I had at the last two art fairs that I've done, I've had a big maritime painting, sort of shipwreck painting, two different paintings, I should say. And the first year there was a man who stood there for about 10 minutes, and he came back 3 times and he didn't say a word, and he just stood in front of that painting. And I always like to let people just look at the art without me sticking my oar in, as it were, but he kept coming back, and he would just stand there silently. And this was, I was trying to think, this was just before the pandemic, so he wasn't wearing a mask, that's right. And he just said something to me that was just, he's just like, it's amazing, and I can't afford to buy it, but it's amazing. And it just had, like, gets me in the heart. And then the last art fair, there was a man standing again, and we were all wearing masks at that point, so it took me a little while to recognize him, but it was the same man looking at another painting that I'd created with the same reaction. So this was one person, and his reaction just meant the world to me. He didn't even have to really say anything. It was just the fact that he kept coming back to look, and he spent time with the painting. And I don't think that would have happened. I don't know that would have happened if I had been creating work with the mindset of this has to sell, and that's really tough when your income does come from your artwork. As you say, I do talk about this openly. And this is why I worked my part-time job for a good few years while I was creating, because it was almost like, if I work and earn a living in other ways, then I have the luxury, or I can indulge, and it is an indulgence. I see it as, but in a good way. I see that as a really positive thing. I can indulge in creating the work that has real deep meaning for me, and first and foremost resonates with me. And then if that resonates with other people, I love that word, resonates. I use it all the time. I should have a swear box for it. But it's just, it's like the perfect word for what I get for I guess what I would like the impact of my work to have. I would love for my work to resonate with people, and if it's only a handful of people, then to me that it resonates with them deeply and they have that reaction, then that's so much more meaningful to me than if, I was going to say, if 100 people were trying to buy it. No, that would be great too.
Exactly. It's like we're torn because we really want to make money and we actually do want our stuff to sell, but we want it to be meaningful and deep at
Yeah,
the same time.
exactly. Yeah. And it's so funny because the kind of flip side to that, or the other side effect of that, is that sometimes I can find it really hard to sell my paintings. You know, because I've created something that, like, well, we're all doing that. We're putting our heart and soul into our work, and my husband's very good because he'll kind of say to me, out of every, and I don't really create collections, but or you know, I guess I create series of work or bodies of work, but he says you should keep a painting out of every grouping that you create, and he's very good at that. And I'm like, no, I need to sell it. But the need to sell comes after the work is created, right? After I'm happy with it, after I've said what I want to say with it, after I've connected with it and connected with the process of creating it. So yeah,
I think it's interesting as well with my own work. I've discovered that the more I'm happy with the work, with like how I made it or the things that are very personal to me, I actually reach a point where I don't care if it sells, because
right,
if it sells, great, I want it to sell. But if it doesn't, I like it so much and there's something so personal in it that I'm like, oh, it's okay, I'll keep looking at this for a while. So I found that has actually helped me let go a little bit of that feeling after like at open studios, if certain things haven't sold, instead of feeling really down, it's like, well, but I learned something while I was making this. It's very valuable to me, so therefore it no longer matters in some ways.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, definitely. And I guess I kind of feel similarly. Again, it's just not being dependent on that process, and just trying to make sure that I have other avenues to my practice where I'm not dependent on that work selling, and then I get to enjoy it a little bit longer.
And like you said, you do the teaching, you do the mentoring, and can just like quickly, as thinking about, because I know that you recently had a solo show. Did you say you'd had a solo show? Yeah,
I have a solo show at the moment. Yeah,
at the moment. So I'm interested sort of in how did you go about organizing that? Did somebody ask you to do a solo show, or did you decide to do a solo show? Because that's sort of something that people hear about, like, I've got a solo show, but I know nothing about, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, this has been very low key, and I have to say it's not been the best experience. I have had a solo show before, and this is so it's a little bit difficult to talk about at the moment because it's kind of fresh. This was something that was organized before the pandemic, and then there was a bit of a breakdown in communication, because obviously so it's in a maritime center, which is it sounds like the absolute perfect venue for my work. It's a small maritime centre quite close to where I live. They were closed for a long time in the pandemic, and I knew they were reorganising their exhibition. So mine was supposed to happen in 2021, and there was a little bit of a how shall I say this? I found out at the very last minute they had organised a date for my show, and when I should have known months before, let's just say. I don't want to say too much about it, but
it's fine.
It came across. It came along in not the best of circumstances, and if I had known that it was going to happen, I would have been creating maritime-based work for it specifically. But I hadn't really been doing a lot of that the last couple of years. I've done a few paintings, but certainly not enough for a solo show that would have been in a maritime centre. I've been because of the pandemic, I'd been creating this work that was more woodland based. So anyway, so this solo show is in a maritime centre. It's just a very small museum with a community room, and as I say, they approached me. Where I live is very rural. There's not actually, it's kind of difficult, it's a bit challenging because there aren't actually that many opportunities for exhibitions around here. There's not many spaces, there's not many venues. At the moment, I'm just about to investigate a solo show in another museum. A friend of mine has a solo show there at the moment. It's a beautiful space, and they've done an amazing job of it. So in a way, it's easier for me to talk about that.
We'll talk about that, because that's, I'm more interested in maybe not specifically just one solo show, but like solo shows in general. Like, how do people go about arranging them? Because I think one of the barriers that I've always had with art is because I had no knowledge whatsoever of any of this. I mean, nobody does, I guess. And so just by talking about like, oh, okay, well, this is how I found out about how to do a solo show is quite interesting.
Oh, well, one of the main things that I would say about that then is we can assume that a solo show has to be in a gallery for that. I mean, that's probably the main thing that I would say about it. And it absolutely doesn't. I have had a solo show in a gallery before, a commercial gallery, but it doesn't have to be in a gallery. There are other ways to do it. So, for example, I have the show in the museum. My friend has a show in another museum. So museums, if they have the space for it, can be a great way of doing an exhibition. I'm just about to get together with a group of artists who I know really well around here to see if there's other ways that we could have exhibitions, maybe taking over. And this isn't something that we've organized yet. We're just at the very, very beginning of talking about it, but we can really see the possibilities of taking over, for example, an abandoned building or an unused building and having a solo show. So I'm just very excited but very new to the idea that there are other options out there, that you can actually not be dependent on somebody else to organize your solo show or even approach you about doing a solo show, but we can actually be very proactive and imaginative about the possibilities for organizing our own exhibitions. And that idea just really excites me. You know, that we all know there's tons of abandoned buildings around the UK, you know, maybe not abandoned, but unused buildings, let's say. Maybe they're like our own, somebody's looking after them. But, you know, I just love the idea of having exhibitions in unusual spaces and spaces. And this is something that I kind of talk to my mentees about, you know, to actually think about the subject and theme of your work and to think, well, okay, is a gallery even the best way of showing that? You know, is that the best way of showing it? Maybe there could be, you know, with my work, I don't know, it could be, I don't know, it could be anything, it could be anywhere, but you know, like in a building that's associated with a fishing industry or something, or you know, for example, here we have the lifeboat service. You know, maybe they have a building that I could host an exhibition in. One of my mentees is an environmental psychologist, so she wasn't, and she's now creating this work that is all about the way our environment impacts us as individuals and the way we impact our environment. So I've been talking to her about, is there a space where this work could be exhibited that kind of tells a story about that theme, you know, that just could be, you know, it's just, I just love the idea of approaching where your work is going to go with the same imagination and ambition and awareness or desire to open up possibilities as you do in creating your own artwork. And you know, for you, I just wonder what that could be. You know, you've got these beautiful, absolutely beautiful drawings and paintings of animals and birds, and is, you know, where would that work belong? Where would it just be really set off to its best potential? And it doesn't have to be a gallery, I don't think so.
And I think it's a really powerful idea as well, because although clearly galleries bring value, but there's something very powerful in not thinking that I need to sit around and wait for someone to come to me, but I can paint whatever I want, and then I can find a good place to exhibit it, you know, and so I can take control of that. And I like having control as well. Don't get me wrong, if somebody shows up and says, hey, we'd love to do, I'd be all for it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I do find it quite, you know, powerful in order to say, yeah, I can do this myself as well. And I love that. Again, we are creative people, so we're thinking creatively. So that sort of thinking imaginatively about, well, where can I host this? That's quite exciting as well. What's that next step for a body of work that I've created?
Absolutely. And, you know, I was mentioned the museum that my friend is exhibiting in at the moment, and museums could be a really great option, because museums in general, for example, the museums that we have around here are quite small. They have an exhibition that's set, that doesn't change very much, you know, they have what they have, they display it the way they display it, but how do they bring new people into that space when the, you know, the because the museum that I'm thinking of is about the history of the town that the museum is in, and that exhibition isn't going to change. That is, you know, they have the stuff. So I think museums, for example, I know that the curator or director of this museum is my friend's exhibition is the first one they've had there, but it's been very proactive about how can we change the space, have new work in there that's going to encourage new people to come into the museum, not just new people, but people who've been here before as well. So I just think that, you know, is a great option. And I think that people who are in charge of these places are starting to really kind of consider, how can we do things differently? How can we bring new people in? How can we change the feeling of the space by having something new and dynamic and exciting in there that, you know, is going to just do that, kind of change the atmosphere of the place, I suppose, in a really interesting way. So I know that, you know, so for example, this director is actively looking for more artists to exhibit in that space. And so, yes, people will find you, but I think, yeah, it's kind of up to us as well to be seeking these opportunities and making contact with the people who, you know, could offer those opportunities to us. So it's definitely a two-way thing.
That's so wonderful to hear. So I wanted to say thank you so much for interviewing with me today. And before we go, I do want you to speak a little bit more about your courses and your mentoring, because I know that you have like some online courses that are sort of rolling that people can study at any time. Yes. I know sometimes you do them like live, maybe live online.
Yeah.
I think you just recently did a landscape one.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak a little bit more about your courses? Because they look amazing. So anybody out there, go check them out. They look amazing.
Thank you so much. So yeah, so the first online course that I created was called Unearth, Gather, Create. And that was almost like the Swiss Army knife of artwork. Every subject, lots of different media, lots of different approaches. So, but off the back of that, I created other ones. So I have a e-course that's dedicated to drawing. I love drawing. Drawing is always a key part of my practice. I have a portraits online course, and then I just before the pandemic I did Gathering the Landscape. So that course I did before the pandemic, but because it was at that tricky time, I decided to do another live version of that just this autumn. So that's basically going out and get exactly what it says, gathering the landscape. So it's really dedicated to the idea of going out sketching, not necessarily with the idea that you then have to bring the work back and create something out of it, but purely as a way of getting out into the landscape and enjoying our beautiful countryside, our beautiful environment that we have here. And off the back of that, I'm probably going to be creating a new e-course in the spring, which is going to be based on the woodland, because that's something that's kind of become very dear to my heart. And then, so those are courses that you can study at any time, sign up for and study at your own pace. And then I guess my signature program is one called Building a Body of Work. And that's a very intensive 9-10 month program, which is really kind of mentoring, and it is there's no instructional videos in it. People kind of get a little bit shocked with that, but no, it's absolutely taking an artist from I have no idea what I want to create and how I want to create it. I can paint, I can draw, but what's my next step, into a 9-month process of beginning to create your own body of work, cohesive, meaningful body of work. And off the back of that, I started to get people who'd done that course and then wanted ongoing mentoring. So I now mentor individual artists, all of whom have done that program. So that I've done for 4 or 5 years now. And actually, I'm going to be changing the way that I do that. And that's going to become a self-study, sign up at any time program, but then people can sign up for mentoring sessions with me within that. So yeah, so that's what I do. Yeah.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And
thank you.
And how about really quickly as well,
Sure.
What's the next thing you're going to do, sort of painting wise, or where are you heading? Because I know you also have open studios at the moment. So what are your thoughts around like what's your next? next
Yeah,
exciting
so I'm
thing?
really lucky to be in a building with other artists, and we're having an open studios event this weekend, which is great because we've got a really very supportive community around us who kind of love coming and seeing what we do. I am going into the next phase of, it's almost like phase 2 of We All Cast Shadows, the work that I did a few years ago. I'm creating a body of work that is called The Lost and the Left Behind, and is about a specific fishing disaster that happened in 1881 in Scotland. It was the biggest storm that Scotland had seen. It was the biggest fishing disaster with the biggest loss of life in Scotland. And I'm creating a body of work around that. So I'm deep in research. 90% research, 10% clamoring to get the work done at the end of it. But that's my next big project. And interestingly, off the back of what we were saying about where do you create work, where do you show it, what do you do, solo show, I am using that project as a real opportunity to investigate a more unusual way of showing my work. So I have ideas of creating larger scale work that maybe would not be suitable for a commercial gallery, but that I want to be much more imaginative about how I display and share that work. So that's my current and ongoing big project that I'm working on.
I love it. I really look forward to seeing where it goes, and I'm going to look forward to seeing it when it's finished. I don't know that anything's ever finished, but when it's ready to be exhibited, or
it's already 2 years in progress, and I've barely started creating the work. So I always think I have this big gap between me thinking of an idea and a plan to do something, and then 2 years before it even really starts coming together. So I'm a slow worker in that sense. But
I think that's good to hear, because I think a lot of people face that. It's like, oh, I've had this idea and it's taken me 10 years to finally get it out there. That's okay. That's life. It's real life, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm a ruminator. I ruminate over things, and
ruminate and research.
Yes, that's it. That's my passion in life. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been really
nice.
And
I'll put all the links in the show notes so people can find you. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Studio Notes with me, Sasha DeWitt, and guest Gillian Lee Smith. I love the way that narrative and atmosphere permeate her paintings and drawings. To find out more about her work, and her courses, you can click the links below. If you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe, as it really helps others to find us. And of course, thank you so much for listening to Studio Notes with me, Sasha DeWitt. Big shout out to the Arts Council, who have given funding for this podcast as part of my DYCP grant. So thank you.